In the military service, one should not make a lot of guesses. I was convinced of this when I received a completely unexpected appointment to the Scientific and Technical Committee of the Naval Forces of the Red Army, then located in Leningrad. I was told about the upcoming work by Axel Ivanovich Berg, one of the heads of the committee, at that time already a well-known scientist radio technician. "You should get acquainted with the work being done in the laboratories of Shorin and Bekhari," said Axel Ivanovich. "Specifically, you will be engaged in testing radio-controlled boats. We must give the fleet torpedo boats, which will go to attack without a single person on board, obeying radio commands from an airplane or ship. The equipment is passing the last bench tests. It is time to start testing at sea. Robert Borisovich Schwarzberg is in charge of telemechanics in our committee. He will help you. The matter is new, very interesting, and has a great future." Soon I got acquainted with the creators of the first domestic radio telecontrol complexes AF Shorin and V. I, Bekhari, leading designers P.P. Litvinsky, B. A. Smyrnin, G.N. Kutinikov, A. I. Mervis. With their help, it was possible to get acquainted with the history of radio telecontrol in the navies of the world. The idea of controlling combat boats at a distance was put forward at the end of the XIX century. In the first samples of equipment, commands to the controlled objects were transmitted by cable. In 1915, the Germans built such boats. But the cable, which connected the boat with the shore-based guidance post, or even an airplane, often broke. Despite this, in 1917 an airplane-controlled German boat successfully attacked an English monitor off the coast of Belgium. At the end of World War I, radio-controlled gunboats appeared in the German Navy. In the late 20s and early 30s, radio telecontrol was intensively practiced in the navies of the United States and England, France and Italy. Russian scientists in the pre-revolutionary years achieved significant success in radio engineering and automation. After the October Revolution, these works were continued with the support of the Soviet government on the personal instructions of Lenin. But after the Civil War, in the conditions of devastation, it was impossible to immediately move to the creation of new samples of technology. Only by 1925 the industry largely reached the pre-war level. With the beginning of the first five-year plan, reconstruction and expansion of old factories, construction of new ones, including enterprises of radio equipment, and instrumentation began. The material base for the creation of the latest technical means for the Army and Navy appeared. By the end of the 20s, domestic radio equipment was installed on submarines entering into service. At the same time, research in the laboratory of AF Shorin and in the design laboratory of AF Shorin began. F. Shorin's laboratory, and in the design bureau of V.I. Bekhari for the naval forces. The work carried out by Soviet designers was of great importance for strengthening the country's defense. Radio-controlled boats could become an important part of the mine artillery positions of the fleets created in those years, designed to protect the coast of the country from the superior forces of the probable enemy. Alexander Fyodorovich Shorin, a talented and versatile scientist, already had a number of inventions in many areas of technology. He created the original letter printing telegraphic apparatus, sound recording and sound reproducing device, the so-called Shorinophone, the domestic apparatus for sound cinema. In 1927, in the rowing port in Leningrad, to the chairman of the All-Union People's Commissariat of National Economy V. Kuybyshev demonstrated to the chairman of the All-Union People's Commissariat of National Economy V. Kuybyshev demonstrated radio control with the help of the system AF Shorin small boat WASP. Valerian Vladimirovich visited Shorin's laboratory in the following years and was interested in the results of its team's activity. Having received an order from the naval forces, AF Shorin did a lot of work to create equipment for radio telecontrol of a torpedo boat. To ensure testing, the Navy gave his laboratory a trophy English torpedo boat Thornycroft and a staff boat Orlik. Instruments from the laboratory's stands were transferred to them. Soon after my appointment to the STC, AF Shorin's deputy P. Litvinsky showed me a radio telecontrol complex, explained the principle of its operation and demonstrated its work. "Now I will show you, Boris Viktorovich, how the operator works," Litvinsky said, as we entered the Orlik's instrumented deckhouse. He sat down at the console of the control station and quickly and intelligently explained the interconnection of devices. I watched with interest as Litvinsky set on the console commands to change the course and speed of the boat, droppy torpedoes, as the lights on the transmitter lit up, indicating that the commands, turned into combinations of radio pulses, went on the air. Litwinsky asked one of the engineers to transmit commands to the runabout, and we walked out onto the dock. The Thornycroft was standing nearby. Radio commands from Orlik are received on the boat, Litvinsky showed on the antenna, amplified in the receiver, then actuate the devices that control the engines, rudder or torpedo apparatus. On the radio command can be put and smokescreen. This equipment is also controlled from a distance. However, now you will see for yourself. We went to the boat. It was strange to observe how, following the radio commands from Orlik, themselves began to work mechanisms on the Thornycroft, started the engines, shifted the rudder. By May 1930, the laboratory created the first sample of radio equipment to be installed on the serial boat type Seish-4 and airplane type Yuguan. The place of the commander-operator, who was supposed to control the torpedo boat by radio, was thus moved into the air. From a height of several thousand meters, A.F. Shorin believed it would be possible to detect enemy ships at a great distance and to launch radio-controlled boats to attack them. Polygon tests of Shorin's complex began. At first, the adjustment and testing of the equipment was carried out on a boat near the factory wall. The airplane was flying somewhere not far away by alternating transects. Radio commands were coming from it, and engineers were working with the devices on the Ish-4. I was on the boat commanded by V.A. Salamatin, or I was in the air on the Yuguan with pilot ID, Karnikin, checking the operation of the control equipment. New things are never easy. There are always a lot of failures and malfunctions during tests of experimental equipment. But the enthusiasm and persistence of the discoverers overcome all difficulties, although it requires a lot of effort. I remember well how, bent in three legs with his head in his shoulders for a long time, engineer Sergei Nikolaevich Kavrin was adjusting the telemechanical unit in a cramped compartment of the boat. Nearby, in the same pose, blue-eyed from the cold Vladimir Borisovich Kozelov monitors the passage of radio pulses of commands from the control plane. Having finished the work at the wall of the plant, we started to go out to the Gulf of Finland, to the area between Leningrad and Kronstadt. New difficulties appeared with the boat engines. It used to happen that a radio complex check would be successful, but the exit would be disrupted, motors would not start, batteries were dead. Engineers run to the plant's gatehouse to dry candles. Time drags painfully, and the airplane keeps circling and circling over the channel of the rowing port. But now the engines are started. The boat goes out into the bay, and the control is transferred to the airplane. The engineers check the operation of the equipment complex, eliminate malfunctions. Occasionally, during the tests, the boat landed on the shoal, which at Petrovsky fairway enough. Then all of us jumped into the far from warm water and pulled the boat to a deep place. The trials continued until the deep fall. A.F. Shorin, P.P. Litvinsky and B.A. Smirini successfully solved a number of difficult technical issues. Positive test results were obtained due to the hard work of the entire team, engineers, technicians and workers. I remember excellent specialists in telemechanics V.P. Zabalin, M.P. Morozov, S.N. Kavrin, N.K. Muratov, R.I. Jurgensen, R.M. Todorov, Inventive Initiative Radio Engineers B.A. Dobrokotov, K. V. Anisiferov, S.D. Karmanovsky, A.A. Egranov, N.M. Mikalenko, V.B. Kozelov, Brothers V.V. and A. V. Chernoglazov, excellent mechanics, manufactured complex parts of telemechanical systems with jewelry precision. On days when no tests were planned, the Shorin complex, I visited the laboratories of the Special Technical Bureau. Here were bench tests of Bakori's equipment, and then began its installation on two boats of special construction. The work was led by leading designers G. N. Kutinikov and A. I. Mervis. Winter came, the Neva River was covered with ice. Tests of the Shorin system decided to move to the Black Sea. The equipment was dismantled and sent to Sevastopol. In February 1931, I left for the south together with M. EP, Morozov, a specialist in telemechanics, and a team of installers. The installation of equipment on the aircraft of Dornier Wall type, assigned to us, and torpedo boat Shesh-4, was carried out quickly. P. Litvinsky in the project provided for the placement of devices on all boats and aircraft available in the armament of the maritime forces. In the first days, M. Morozov and radio operator N.E. Mikolenko flew on the airplane with pilot V. Bortnovsky. M. Morozov steered the boat. I went out on the boat and watched the adjustment of equipment, which was carried out by S. N. Kavrin and V. B. Kizelov. Then more and more often I began to control from the airplane myself. It was a fascinating business. From the airplane there was a magnificent view, but we did not have to admire the seascape. We had to not miss the appearance of the target ship. With the detection of the enemy I determine the side of its movement, approximate course and speed, quickly make calculations and issue commands to the boat. The obedient H-4 rushes to cross the target course to the point of torpedo salvo. The next stage of testing came. P.P. Litvinsky came to Sevastopol and brought the stabilization devices designed and manufactured in the laboratory of A.F. Shorin. F. Shorin devices for stabilizing the boat's course, starting and reversing the engines. Their installation and adjustment began. It was especially hard to achieve reliable stabilization of the boat's course. The original device for this purpose was designed by P.P. Litvinsky, using the gyroscopic device of the torpedo Aubry's device. It was a new word in technology, the prototype of autohelm, which later found application on boats and submarines, served as a basis for the development of autopilot. The work of the new devices was thoroughly tested at sea. Then they also determined the greatest distances at which it is possible to control the boat from the airplane. After several test runs in the presence of R.B. Schwarzberg, an employee of the Scientific and Technical Committee, who arrived in Sevastopol, all the equipment was sent to Leningrad. The tests gave satisfactory results. Now Shorin started to work on modification of the whole radio control complex in order to provide simultaneous control of two boats from one airplane. And the equipment delivered from the Black Sea, the laboratory began to prepare for state tests. To the same tests prepared its equipment and Osti Bureau. Here from STK, supervision of the work was conducted by I. Rumiantsev. Common in the complexes A.F. Shorin and V. I. Bekhari was the principal of torpedo boat control by radio. But there were some differences. First, the commander-operator and the control station of V.I. Bekhari were located on the ship. Not in the air, the Navy allocated the destroyer constructor for this purpose. Secondly, Osti Bureau included a special counting and deciding device in the control station. Go out in a torpedo attack is not so easy. After all, the enemy ship maneuvers, and the boat needs to give a torpedo salvo at a distance of only about 1 kilometer from the target. But to do this, you need to take such a position torpedo salvo, so that the target did not have time to evade the rushing to it two torpedoes. To reach this position, the commander of the boat all the time makes the necessary calculations. V.I. Bekhari decided to automate these calculations. The distance and course angles were entered into the counting and solving device. According to them, the device determined the course and speed of the enemy and developed the course of the torpedo boat in the attack. It remained to take readings from it and transmit the appropriate commands to the boat by radio. Thus, in the complex of V.I. Bekhari, the boat's attack course was determined by the device, and in the complex of A.F. Shorin, it had to be calculated by the operator himself on a map or tablet. Creation of a counting and deciding device was a significant technical achievement for that time. Its theoretical basis was developed by Professor of the Naval Academy L.G. Goncharov, a well-known expert in the field of counting and solving devices. On the instructions of A.I. Berg, I began to develop a program of state tests of radio telecontrol complexes. The program included, in particular, torpedo attack on a maneuvering target covered by smoke screens. Inclusion of this item caused objections V.I. Bekhari, he feared that the smoke will hide the target from observers on the control ship, and the operator will not be able to bring the boats to the enemy. However, it was impossible to go to such a simplification of the tests, and the program was approved in the form proposed by me. At the beginning of August 1931, in the Baltic, there was a training exercise, which was attended by Vladimir Mitrofanovich Orlov, who had just been appointed Chief of Naval Forces. On his instructions, we prepared for a demonstration torpedo attack by a radio-controlled boat of the Shorin system, with actual launching of training torpedoes. Having received a signal of approach from the west of the squadron, I took the boat to the Krasnogorsk roadstead. Here the airplane Yug-1 took control of the boat. On the airplane was Axel Ivanovich Berg. He himself worked on the instruments and perfectly led the boat into the torpedo attack. The experience of commanding a submarine was evident. Torpedoes passed, as it is supposed in training firing, under the keel of the battleship. It is clear that Shorin's work, demonstrated so clearly, was highly appreciated by the Chief of Naval Forces. Then, in August, the People's Commissar for Military and Naval Affairs K.E. Voroshilov appointed a commission to conduct final tests of the complexes of AF, Shorin and VI. Bakori. The commission included representatives of the Navy and Army, scientific design institutes and industry. It was headed by the inspector of the naval forces Peter Ivanovich Smirnov-Svetlovsky, a comprehensively erudite naval specialist. Tests were conducted in the Gulf of Finland. Boats, controlled from the plane or from the ship, on radio commands departed from the pier, went out to sea, maneuvered, rushed into the attack and launched torpedoes. Attacks were also carried out on the target ship covered with a smoke screen. As VI. Bakori had foreseen, the operator on the airplane was in a better position than the one on the control ship. Observation from the ship was hindered by the smoke screen, thus revealed a significant disadvantage of the complex Osti Bureau. The program also provided for the operation of complexes in conditions of radio interference. To fulfill this part of the tests, AF Shorin created a special interference transmitter. This experimental development marked the beginning of a new original direction in the laboratory's activity. And now the tests were completed. The Commission proposed to adopt the complex AF Shorin. Osti Bureau offered to refine their equipment to provide the ability to attack ships covered by smoke screens. It was supposed to use an airplane for this purpose. The tests of the complex V. Bakori decided to resume in 1932. At the end of 1931, I, together with a group of engineers and technicians, went to Moscow. We had to show the work of AF Shorin's system to the senior staff of the People's Commissariat for Military and Maritime Affairs. To inspect the equipment arrived K.E. Voroshilov, M.N. Tukhachevsky, J.B., Gamarnik, M.G. Stern, A.I. Korkin, P.P. Uborovich. Also present were the Chief of the Air Force Y.I. Oksnis and the Chief of the Communications Department N.M. Sinyavsky, as well as the leadership of the Naval Forces. V.M. Orlov and P.I. Smirnov-Svetlovsky presented K.E. Voroshilov, Shorin, Berg and Litvinsky. Berg reported on the work on radio telecontrol, which is being conducted under the guidance of STC. Then Shorin spoke about his complex. After that, everyone watched with interest a documentary movie about the tests of Shorin's complex, filmed on the Baltic in 1931. In the first months of 1932, the chief designers demonstrated their equipment to members of the Politburo and the government. Complex AF Shorin complex was adopted for service, and V. Bakori was offered to conduct additional tests. At the same time, the government decided to build a precision mechanics and automation plant. Thus radio-controlled or, as they were called, wave-controlled torpedo boats were recognized. Soon began their serial construction, and then the formation of special detachments and divisions in the fleets. A lot had to overcome in this case, all sorts of obstacles, resistance from the unbelievers and skeptics. After all, even during the tests at the first malfunctions, some members of the Commission began to talk with an important look about the need to save government gasoline and funds, suggested to stop, or, in the best case, interrupted trips to sea. It is always difficult for new technology to make its way into the future. And the path of our rocket creators in the pre-war years was not easy. There were experts who said that we should not hurry, authoritatively explained that the GERD project a matter of the distant future. And it turned out not far away at all. Adoption of the Soviet Navy torpedo boats' wave control was a great success of our science and technology, served to strengthen the defense capability of the motherland. The work on the complexes of AF Shorin and V.I. Bakori, as I realized later, served as a powerful impetus for the development of a number of branches of science in our country, contributed to the creation of new types of production, development of radio engineering and telemechanics devices that did not exist before. Much of the developed for radio telecontrol equipment found application in GERD projects. As it is known, one advanced direction in technology invariably enriches another. During the 2 years that I served in the Scientific and Technical Committee, the complexes of radio control equipment were comprehensively tested. The fleets began to receive new equipment, which made it possible to start forming squads of radio-controlled boats. The control equipment was placed on seaplanes of MBR-2 type attached to torpedo boat divisions. At that time, it was a formidable weapon. It was necessary to work out as quickly as possible the organization of combat use of radio-controlled boats to establish the operation of complex equipment system AF Shorin. Of course, in the same years, the construction of conventional, not radio-controlled boats and ships of other classes developed rapidly. According to the 6-year program of military shipbuilding approved in December 1926 by the Council of Labour and Defence, the naval forces were to receive 12 submarines, 18 patrol ships, 36 torpedo boats, as well as cruisers Chervona Ukraina, Red Crimea, and several destroyers which were to be completed. The battleship October Revolution was modernized under the same program. In April 1929, the ex-VI Party Conference adopted the first 5-year plan for the development of the national economy of the USSR. One of the tasks of the 5-year plan was to ensure the beginning of the technical rearmament of the Army and Navy. While the 5-year plan was being developed, the Council of Labour and Defence approved a new shipbuilding program for 1928 to 1933, which provided for the construction of a large number of ships. In November 1930, the first patrol ship of the Hurricane type came into service, and soon after that, one after another, the first 6 submarines of the Dekabrist and Leninets types. In 1932, in the presence of S.M. Kirov, the first destroyer Leader Leningrad was laid down. All in all, in the first 5-year period, the construction of 3 leaders, 12 patrol ships, 1 minesweeper, 2 river monitors, and 59 submarines began. The construction of the Mosquito fleet was also increasing under the second program. The naval forces were to receive 36 torpedo boats. In addition, it was planned to begin construction of another 60 boats. At the same time, it was decided to create a wooden shipbuilding yard, to expand production of aluminum alloys for boats, to organize the production of domestic boat engine, testing of new torpedoes. At the fleets were created compounds of combat boats, and although the industry was still producing boats Shesh 4, but already approached the testing of torpedo boat of a new type with improved tactical and technical data, complete with fully domestic equipment. Attention to the construction of boats, especially torpedo boats, corresponded to the fleet's orientation to the creation of light surface and underwater forces, strengthening of coastal and mine position defense. In 1932, when the Office of Naval Forces of the Red Army introduced the position of a specialist in torpedo boats and special equipment. It happened that I was the first such specialist. It is clear that there was plenty of work at the new place of service. Under the guidance of my immediate superiors, Deputy Chief of Naval Forces I. M. Ludry and E.S. Panzerzansky, who headed the Department of Combat Training, urgently created courses of combat training of torpedo boats and instructions for their combat activities. Such guiding documents did not exist, neither in the Russian pre-revolutionary nor in the Soviet Navy. When developing projects creatively used, and the already available experience of the first divisions of torpedo boats in the Baltic and Black Sea, and the organization of combat training in the Air Force. Thus, for torpedo boats, as in aviation, introduced a division of crews, squads and divisions into 3 lines depending on the level of their preparation for combat missions. Despite the understandable difficulties, the task was completed on time. It took only a week or 2 for the command to consider and then approve the instructions and combat training courses for torpedo boats. In 1934, they were delivered to the formations. By this time, the Baltic, Pacific and Black Sea fleets already had brigades of torpedo boats, as well as separate divisions. The brigades included a division of radio-controlled boats, while the individual divisions included a detachment. Mosquito Fleet, as torpedo boats were sometimes called then, significantly strengthened our sea power in coastal areas. Gradually changed, and the qualitative composition of torpedo boat formations in 1933 to 1934, the Esche-4s were replaced by the G5s. These were boats with a large displacement of 14.5 tons, having two domestic engines of 850 horsepower. Their hulls were made of aluminium alloy ring aluminum, which had just been mastered by our industry. The alloy, which was used mainly in aircraft construction, was created at the Kolchuga plant by metallurgical engineer V. A. Butterloff. At that time, a number of difficulties had to be faced. First of all, domestic motors GAM-34 of the remarkable designer A.A. Mikulin turned out to be more powerful than American ones. The boat developed a speed of 48 knots, but also heavier than them. This caused the need to strengthen the hulls of G5 boats. The experience of using these boats in the Northern and Pacific fleets also showed their insufficient seaworthiness. Therefore, in the North, it was decided not to create connections of boats, and in other maritime theatres introduced a restriction on the outputs to the sea, depending on the size of the wave. Despite some shortcomings, the G5 type boat had high combat effectiveness and surpassed the best foreign models of the same displacement in terms of their tactical and technical data. In the course of my service, I had to deal with numerous matters related to torpedo boats. Thus, in terms of improving the design and seaworthiness, operational reliability, I had to work with specialists of the Shipbuilding and Armament Department and their chiefs A. K. Sivkov and N.P. Leonov. I spent many days with operators of the General Staff of the Red Army, where I was called to develop a system of basing of boat formations and organization of their interaction with fortified areas. In 1935, the range of duties became wider. I was appointed head of the Torpedo Boat Service in the Combat Training Directorate. At the same time, I continued to deal with special equipment that was the name of new developments, including radio control. At that time, the staff of the Maritime Forces Directorates were few, but the work was fast and organized. We looked up to our chiefs, people who were still young. There was no one older than 36 to 38 years old who had enviable energy and deep knowledge of their work. Vladimir Mitrofanovich Orlov, Chief of Naval Forces, took his high position after several years of commanding the Black Sea Fleet. We were impressed by his erudition in matters of military technology, excellent knowledge of the state and prospects of development of foreign navies. V. M. Orlov and his deputy I. M. Ludry, one of the first graduates of the Naval Academy, former sailor artillerist of the Tsarist fleet, were characterized by intelligence and simplicity in dealing with subordinates. I remember Ivan Martinovich Ludry with special warmth. I remember how calmly and patiently, with an unchanging Latvian accent, he explained to us this or that task, always achieving full clarity and understanding. The kindest memories I kept, and about Eduard Samoilovich Panzerjansky, head of the Department of Combat Training, the experience of the First World War, the leadership of a number of outstanding operations during the Civil War, when he commanded the Onega flotilla, allowed Panzerjansky skillfully directed the work on the creation of the first Soviet statutes of ship service and combat regulations of the maritime forces, the rules of joint navigation. As far as I remember, he owns the phrase inserted in the last of the listed documents, dashing maneuver, not caused by circumstances, indicates a lack of naval training. These words have since been included many times in the rules of joint sailing and are familiar to every military sailor. Personal qualities of Orlov, Ludry and Panzerjansky, their attention and friendliness to us, young commanders, contributed to a healthy, friendly atmosphere in the team, helped to solve numerous issues intelligently and promptly for the benefit of the common cause. I don't remember anyone raising his voice. Despite the difference in position and age, it was easy to deal with the commander of the Black Sea Fleet, Ivan Kuzmik-Kozov, a hero of the Civil War, commander of the famous detachment of Kozanovs. I met him during frequent business trips to Sevastopol. Like many other first commanders of the Red Fleet, including V. F. Chernyshev Ivan Ivanov, F. Chernyshev Ivan Kuzmik was from the Black Midshipmen. He was only 20 years old when he led the famous detachment of sailors Baltiersky. Kozanovцы fought on the Volga and the Caspian Sea, participated in the landing in Enzeli, beat the Whites on the shores of the Sea of Azov. By the nature of my service, I knew well the state of affairs in the brigades of torpedo boats in the Baltic and Black Sea, I maintained friendly business relations with their commanders. With the commander of the brigade of torpedo boats in the Baltic, Gergard Pavlovich Nestvedum, who graduated from Frunze College in 1924, I got acquainted in 1931. Then he commanded a destroyer, which was used as a target ship in tests of radio-controlled boats. Nestved became commander after FS Oktyabrsky's transfer to the Pacific Fleet. A good organizer, an excellent sailor, Gergard Pavlovich did everything possible to ensure that his brigade had a high combat readiness, successfully solved all training tasks. I also knew I.L. Kravets, commander of the Black Sea Fleet Torpedo Boat Brigade. Ivan Lavrentievich was a colourful man, heavy, forever weathered red face, with sly squinted eyes. He sailed as a sailor on fighter boats in the First World War, commanded a fighter boat in the Civil War on the Volga, Caspian Sea, and Azov Sea. In 1926, Kravets is already the commander of the Division of Patrol and Torpedo Boats on the Black Sea, and since 1929, with the formation of a brigade of torpedo boats, the brigade commander. The brigade and the boats were Ivan Lavrentyievich's life's work. He knew how to talk to people, willingly spent evenings with boaters, knew almost everyone by name. The brig paid special attention to the boats' bosuns, on the combat organization their deputy commanders. The bosuns at the Black Sea Brigade were almost all overtime servicemen. Once I asked Kravets how he managed to achieve such a high percentage of super-enlisted men. So I'll pick him up a Sevastopol Divchina, marry him, help him to build a house on Korabelnaya or Karantina, so the wine will not go anywhere. I should add that Kravets' brigade invariably took the first places in the fleet and in combat training and in sports. But the Pacific Fleet could not get in any way business trips to the Far East, were allowed only by the People's Commissar of Defense. Meanwhile, it was there in the mid-30s created the most powerful compounds Mosquito Fleet. After repeated requests in the summer of 1935, I was finally allowed to travel to the Pacific Fleet. In those years, the way to the Far East took at least 12 days. We got there by train. From dawn till dark, I looked out the window of the car, admiring the harsh nature of the Urals, Siberia and Primorye. Vladivostok, spread on the hills between the Ushuri and Amurian Gulfs, immediately won me over. The city was not even half a century old then, and the Pacific Fleet had existed for only 3 years. The fleet was building bases and coastal batteries, practicing the interaction of heterogeneous forces submarines, aviation and torpedo boats in the defense of its coast. In Vladivostok, I immediately went to the headquarters to introduce myself to the fleet commander M.V. Viktorov. He received me as an old acquaintance from the Baltic and frequent meetings in the Naval Forces Department. I also remember, Comrade Lieutenant Captain, how dashingly you approached the wall at the bridge of Lieutenant Schmidt, and your bosun almost played in the water, smiled the commander. Indeed, there was such a case. In October 1929, accepted new torpedo boats. Solemn flag raising decided to make during the rally. The day before, the Black Sea commanders boasted that they moor at 1,200 RPM of engines. I decided to try it, forgetting that this number of revolutions in the Black Sea Tornicrofts corresponds to 18 knots, and on my Eshi 432. That's the speed, almost 60 kilometers per hour, and I went to the granite embankment. I put the engines to stop the boat, which had just flown on the Redan, plunged into the water, and stopped. At the same moment, obeying the force of inertia, the bosun fell, but still managed to hold on to the mast. This dashing maneuver did not go unnoticed. That's when I met M.V. Viktorov. He invited me to join him. The maneuver is well calculated, but it is not necessary that the Red Fleet men fell overboard, Commander. Is that right? Of course, I said yes. Papa Viktorov, as he was called in the wardroom, commanded the Pacific Fleet from the moment of its formation. A navigator on the cruiser Oleg during the Civil War, he commanded the Baltic and Black Sea fleets before coming to the Pacific. His tall, athletic figure, with a large, weathered to redness, a little sullen face, was known on all the ships of the Red Fleet. Having reported the plan of my work and having received a number of useful advices, I went for a wander around the city and admired for a long time the marvellous views of the sea and the shores with verdant hills. The same day, towards evening, I went out on the staff boat to the bay where the brigade of torpedo boats was based. The majestic shores, the wide smoothness of the bays, especially Zolotoy Rog and Ulis, struck me with their beauty. However, there was no time to admire the scenery. After a brief conversation with Kombrig FS Oktyabrski, I immediately began work. In the first days it became clear to me what a huge work was done by builders and boat builders for incomplete 3 years. A settlement, boathouse and berths appeared in the previously deserted bay. Warehouses were built in the hills. It was felt that the life was getting better. The clean houses of the command staff and petty officers and superintendents had green vegetable gardens. Constantly repelling pheasant raids, women grow good crops of potatoes and vegetables. At the foot of the hill a summer club, sports fields, and nearby, in 100 meters from the settlement of boatmen, untouched by man-nature. The thickets are full of pheasants, wild goats, raccoons, and the animals, as if not recognizing the changes that have taken place, descend from the hills to the bay right along the street of the settlement. I reported the results of the inspection of the boat brigade back to Vladivostok to the fleet commander M.V. Viktorov. Komflot was satisfied with the positive assessment of the level of combat training in the Oktyabrski connection. Now I had to visit the locations of individual divisions of torpedo boats. There was not much time. Big fleet exercises were approaching. A torpedo boat took me to one of the bays, to the basing place of I. Kruglov's separate division. It was nice to meet familiar commanders and petty officers. All of them started their service in the Baltic or Black Sea, and only recently ended up in the Far East. Many petty officers became boat commanders and motor officers became squad mechanics, and my former subordinate Gulim, the commander of the motorists department, even became a divisional mechanic. Living and basing conditions here, and in one more division, were more severe than in the brigade base. But the combat training of boatmen was intensive. People worked with enthusiasm and friendship. I went to sea several times for exercises and torpedo firing, and was convinced of the high level of combat readiness of the boats. In those years, the situation in the Far East was tense. Japanese militarists, having seized Manchuria, threatened our borders. It was at that time People's Commissar Voroshilov said that we are not going to attack anyone, but our submarines, aviation, light forces and coastal defense can discourage any aggressor to try the strength of our borders. Having finished checking in individual divisions, I returned to Vladivostok to take part in large joint exercises of the fleet and fortified areas to repel the landing. The brigade of torpedo boats had to strike at ships and transports of the enemy, in cooperation with aviation and coastal artillery. The enemy was designated mine barriers, destroyers and patrol ships. By the time assigned to the brigade and individual divisions to attack, the weather deteriorated. Quickly, as it happens in the Far East, the sky was covered with low, almost black clouds, the wind was increasing, the excitement exceeded 5 points. In such conditions, torpedo boats could not use their main advantage, speed. Nevertheless, the fleet commander did not cancel the task assigned to the connections of boats. I went to sea on a torpedo boat together with the chief of staff of the brigade, Ag Golovko. Of course, at the command post at the fleet headquarters were worried about the boaters, and I did not leave me with the thought whether the small ships will withstand the single combat with the sea elements. Nevertheless, despite the fact that the boats, even at medium and low speeds, with difficulty overcome the wave, the torpedo strike on the compound of the enemy was made. However, it was not without accidents. 2 boats from a separate division, commanded by F.P. Kryukin, who was familiar to me from the Baltic, lost their engines and were thrown ashore by the surf. Fortunately, there were no casualties. The boats were later repaired. At the dismantling of the exercise, Fleet Commander M.V. Viktorov noted the lack of seaworthiness of boats. For open theatres, such as the Pacific, he said, need torpedo boats of greater displacement and range, capable of sailing in waves of at least 5 points. Sooner or later we will get such boats, but now we need to practice the effective use of Shesh-4, beginning to arrive to us G5. The Maritime Forces Department knew, of course, that boats of the Shesh-4 and G5 types could operate successfully only in the Baltic and Black Sea, in the so-called closed theatres. A few years later, the experience of the Great Patriotic War confirmed it. But the Northern and Pacific fleets required larger displacement boats. It was not easy to solve this problem in the 30s. The shipbuilding industry in the Far East was still in its infancy. The boats built in the western regions of the country were delivered to the Far East by railroad, and their dimensions were limited to certain dimensions. The G5 type boat, as well as the Eshi 4, was transported on a railroad platform in assembled form in full readiness. This was a great advantage, as it provided operational maneuver between maritime theatres on inland land routes. On the results of the exercises in the Pacific Fleet, I reported in detail to I.M. Ludry on my return to Moscow. He ordered to accelerate the issuance of tasks to industry for the development of large torpedo boats. Since the fall began the development of projects of boats such as M3 and SM4. But be that as it may, by the end of 1935 our fleet already had 250 torpedo boats. This is a lot, especially if we remember that in 1928 we had only 50. In the winter of 1935/36, I was directly involved in the work on the projects of new boats, and also together with E. Pivovarov, A.K. Konopko, V.I. Gorelkin and other specialists of the staff of the Baltic Fleet Torpedo Boat Brigade worked on new instructions for combat activity and combat training course. These necessary documents came to torpedo boat formations in 1936 and helped to raise the level of their combat readiness to a new, higher level. In the spring and summer of 1936, I repeatedly visited the Baltic and Black Sea with inspections. The fleets were undergoing intensive combat training, new warships and boats, submarines and coastal batteries were being mastered. Commanders and Red Fleet officers spared no effort and time for combat training. After all, newspapers and radio every day brought alarming news. The Japanese imperialists were expanding their aggression in China, Italy and Germany, were actively helping the fascist rebels of General Franco in Spain. There was a war in Abyssinia. In Europe and the Far East there were hotbeds of war. In these days the Maritime Forces Administration was doing everything possible to strengthen the power, raise the combat readiness of fleets. As you know, our country provided assistance to Republican Spain. Some of our boatmen from the fall of 1936 became volunteers of its navy. I remember that among the commanders of torpedo boats sent to Spain were Black Sea sailors N. L. Kanevsky and A. K. Eramin, Pacific Oceanian N.A., Pitarsky and Baltic S. A. Osipov. During another business trip to the Baltic, I asked G.P. Nestved, the brigade commander, to entrust me with a division of radio-controlled boats, the post of commander of which was just being vacated. L.M. Galler, then commanding the Baltic Fleet, signed the corresponding submission to Moscow, but only 3 months later, and after my report, V.M. Orlov imposed a resolution I agree on the condition of an equivalent replacement. I was replaced by V.M. Narikov, who had just graduated from the Naval Academy, a short training camp, and I left Moscow together with my family for Leningrad, and on to the new place of service Koporskaya Bay. Here on the coast was based a division of radio-controlled boats, which I was to command. The commander of the coastal base showed me 2 storied wooden houses of the command staff and pilots of the seaplane guidance planes attached to the division. Petty officers, senior enlisted men, lived with their families in the surrounding villages, where they rented rooms from peasants. Naval officers were accommodated in a 2-story barracks. The command and headquarters of the division had practically no room of their own. In summer, when it was warm, they occupied a temporary house built on a live string. The Chief of Staff A. Shafarov, who had already received a new assignment, explained to me that anyway in winter life stops, people are only engaged in maintenance of equipment. Thus there was no need for a house for the headquarters. I did not argue with him, but I thought that without resolving the issues of everyday life will not ensure combat readiness of the division. Well, how, for example, to quickly gather on the alarm, and even at night petty officers that live in the villages? From a conversation with the commanders of the detachments that made up the division, K. Shilov, N. Bunin, Shilov, N. Bunin, N. and Bakelin and A. Shamborsky, as well as the new Chief of Staff of the Division G. Frantsev, it became clear that not all is not well with the organization of combat training, combat readiness. In each of the detachments, along with experienced commanders served and newly appointed, just beginning to master the management of the boat. This led to the fact that the squadron had to rely on inexperienced young people. and this did not allow them to move on to more complex tasks. As a result, every campaign in the division was started, as they say, from scratch. After I learned about this system of combat training, it became clear why so far the division had not managed to master radio control from airplanes by squads and the division as a whole. We practiced radio control of only a link, but even here we did not achieve much success. Meanwhile, all the opportunities for the successful fulfillment of training tasks were available. Assigned to the division squadron, seaplane driver type MBR-2 was based near the base of boats on Lake Kopiskoye. The squadron commander Balabolkin and its Commissar Gorovich assured me that their equipment was in good condition. The pilots will not fail. Talking with people, observing them in their work, I scrutinized the level of training of the division's boat commanders. I remembered M. Pomaskov A., Rodin, M. Meister Esbobrinin, excellent sailors, wonderful people. All of them gave their young lives in the fight against fascist invaders during the Great Patriotic War. K. Shilov and L. Shamborsky, the commanders of the squads, died heroically. I will not forget my favorite young, cheerful boat commanders A. Sverdlov and M. Starostin, who won many victories during the war and became heroes of the Soviet Union. Soon there was a redistribution of boat commanders within the division. In the first squadron were transferred to the commanders who already had experience in radio control of a link of boats from an airplane, in the second a single boat, and in the third young commanders, those who had to master their specialty from the beginning. According to the same principle, they also moved from squad to squad of senior radio telemechanics. Now the division had detachments of the first, second and third line, and each included crews of boats, the same on the achieved level of combat training. But before the start of working out tasks at sea was still far away, slowly stretched months of protracted winter. Meanwhile, we wanted to launch the boats and start going to sea as early as possible. Usually the boats of the brigade went to the Gulf of Finland in the second half of May, when it was cleared of ice near Kronstadt. From Kopo Bay the ice was carried out by winds and currents even earlier in the beginning of May. However, in the harbour enclosed by a wooden breakwater near the moorings of the division, the ice held for another 2 weeks. Having gathered the commanders of the squads and my staff, I set a task to finish the repair of boats and installation of engines and other equipment on them in April, in order to start going to sea not from the beginning of June, but from the first days of May. The works on ice removal from the piers started in April. Its thickness reached a metre, and the first attempts to cut ice flows with a hot water jet were not successful. Local wit already recalled a tit that wanted to light up the sea. But then K. Shilov proposed to cut ice flows with the help of lifting boat hoists, using them as a saw. The work boiled over, and in a day or two boats were already lined up at the piers in clear water. But there was ice in the bay itself. It was necessary to drill pits to lay TNT charges. After the explosions, a channel stretched across the bay from the piers to clear water. The way to the sea was open. Combat training in the 1937 campaign, the division began 2 weeks earlier than usual. It was possible to carry out repair and installation of engines in a shortened period of time thanks to the selfless work of the ace of their craft, petty officers motorists V. Elizarov, I. Ostinov, M. Pushkalov, N. Morosin S. Abarin. Abarin, mechanics engineers L. Emishov, M.S. Makarov, ILI. L. Larkin, technician SI. Remiv, telemechanics and radio operators G. Yumka, G. Shapovalov, A. Solovyev and others, as well as specialist S. Rezakov and V. Fabrichnoi, who were in charge of them, worked well to put in order their complex equipment. Fabrichnoi. Divisional Navigator T. Savinkov timely checked all the navigational equipment of the boats. Not lagged behind, and torpedoists, who were preparing together with the divisional miner G. Kuznetsov their weapon. In those years, the torpedo engine was a piston machine. The pistons were driven by high-pressure compressed air pumped into special torpedo tanks. Torpedoes were supposed to be stored with reduced air pressure for safety reasons. Therefore, before going to sea for firing or when putting the boats on alert, it was necessary to pump air into the torpedoes until its pressure in the tank did not reach the required value. This required a lot of time, and the old compressor, available at the shore base of the division, could not timely provide air to a large number of torpedoes. Therefore, our boats, as a rule, went to Kronstadt for torpedoes. This took a lot of time and delayed the terms of bringing the division to combat readiness. We decided to follow the example of Pacific boaters in the Far East. Torpedoes were stored with full pressure. This was forced by the tense situation of those years, memorable for numerous provocations of Japanese militarists. During a business trip to the Pacific Fleet, I was convinced that with such storage, torpedoes are in good condition and safety is quite ensured. True, the air pressure in the tanks gradually fell, but a slight decrease in air pressure was acceptable. Started to keep torpedoes with full pressure and in our division. Now the air had to be pumped up much less often, and we coped with the provision and firing and bringing the division to combat readiness without the help of the coastal base of the brigade in Kronstadt. Our torpedo preparation norms were almost halved. More than once in the winter the division commissar Vasily Mikhailovich Golovichov, a handsome and warm-hearted man, and I racked our brains trying to find ways of accommodating the families of senior enlisted men in the houses of our base. But nothing worked out, and the families continued to live in nearby villages. In the middle of May, VM Golovichov learned that in connection with the construction of the airfield are moving to a new village residence of the village Kupler. We managed to get the consent of the commander of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet A, K. Sivkov, and a member of the military council, Y.V. Volkov, who came to us in May with an inspection, to transfer to the division peasant houses from this village. The division was allocated 10,000 rubles to carry out the necessary work. The houses were dismantled by Red Fleet soldiers and floated down the Kopenskoye Lake directly to the territory of our coastal base. The newly assembled houses, each for 2 families of petty officers, with new white shingle roofs and plastered rooms, looked quite good. Now all the personnel of the base were in one place. At the same time, the personnel equipped the club, adapting for it the building of the summer barracks. Cinema hall and other rooms were insulated, plastered, skilled craftsmen built stoves, so that the club was warm in the worst frosts. In the cinema hall, there were armchairs with folding seats, in the foyer beautiful sconces. In general, the club turned out to be a glory. Immediately arose amateur artist circles, in the work of which the wives of commanders and petty officers took the most active part. Of course, the construction work had to be carried out on days of rest, in the evenings the goodness of the bright summer nights on the Baltic. After all, combat training was in full swing with high intensity. Organizational activities carried out in the division in the winter gave their results. Boats K. Shilov has already successfully worked out the task of guidance from the control plane as part of the squadron, and squads N, Bonin and L. Shamborsky as part of the link. Of course, the division's boats learned to operate with the so-called manual control as ordinary torpedo boats without radio control. Already in July, the division reached the required level of combat readiness. Not once in the summer of 1937 came to us various commissions. One of the inspections was led by Arseny Grigorievich Golovko, who at that time was studying at the Naval Academy. The inspectors went to sea on boats, flew on control airplanes. The commission positively assessed the level of combat readiness. At the same time, in the Pacific Fleet, torpedo boats' radio control also successfully passed all the tasks. Apparently by this time and in the Far East, as well as in the Baltic, have overcome the inevitable difficulties of mastering complex equipment, so to speak, the disease of growth. That same summer visited our Unit A. I. Berg. Berg. We showed Axel Ivanovich what we had achieved in telecontrol on signals from an airplane in the air. The torpedo boat standing at the pier went out to sea, performed combat maneuvering and returned to the base, to the pier. Autumn came, and with it the time of the fleet exercises. As in previous years, practiced the battle at the mine artillery position. Surface ships, including battleships, struck at the enemy coming from the west in cooperation with torpedo boats and aviation. The moment of the torpedo boat's strike I could clearly see from the height of 2,000 meters, at which the division's control plane hovered. Breaking through the smoke screens, more than 50 boats from 3 directions were rapidly approaching the ships of the enemy. The picture is impressive. The exercise for our division went well. All aircraft and boats accomplished the task. There were no failures in the equipment. There were no sunken training torpedoes. Division of radio-controlled boats received high praise from the People's Commissar of Defense K. Voroshilov, was among the best parts of the fleet. At the end of the summer campaign, the commander of the 1st Unit K.A. Shilov was awarded the Order of the Red Star. In November, the command of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet gathered commanders of formations and units to summarize the results of the past year and set tasks for the next. We, the division commanders of the Brigade of Torpedo Boats, with interest awaited the reading of the Order Conflot with the definition of prizes based on the results of combat training. In early 1937, Key Voroshilov's Special Order announced that the commander of the unit that took first place in the military district, or in the fleet, awarded a passenger car. We knew that the Navy Commission proposed to award first place to the division of radio-controlled boats, second and third place the other two divisions of our brigade, and the battleship Murat IV. However, I.S. Isakov, commander of the fleet, in his speech to us at the meeting said that it is wrong to put on the same board boats and battleship. Therefore, the Military Council decided not to award the main prize to anyone. The commander and commissar of the Murat were awarded with gold watches, the division commissar Golovichov and I were awarded with diplomas and money prizes, and the division commanders and commissars were awarded with certificates. At the beginning of December, the Koporsky Bay was covered with solid ice. The boats were already standing in the both houses. The crews, as usual, started dismantling equipment and repairs. Seasonality in combat training was typical in those years for the entire Red Banner Baltic Fleet. All its bases were located in the eastern, freezing part of the Gulf of Finland. Classes and trainings were conducted in the established order, strictly according to the plan. We did not forget in the division and general military training we arranged multi-kilometer ski crossings with full dressing, performed shooting exercises. The objects of our coastal base were scattered over quite a large territory. To guard them required so many people that the guard duty disrupted the normal course of combat training. Then I remembered about infrared detection devices created in the laboratory of engineer V. Gurov. In the tests of these devices I participated in the service in the Scientific and Technical Committee in the winter of 1931. Gurov conducted work on the assignments of the Red Army Communications Department. But the Navy also showed interest in the application of infrared technology. At the suggestion of the Scientific and Technical Committee, V. Gurov later created samples of heat seekers, detecting ships by thermal radiation, and a number of other devices. One of the types of equipment that could be used to protect the warehouses of the coastal base, piers and other objects, we managed to get from the Red Army Communications Department. The operation of this prototype showed good results. People, not to mention cars, crossing the line controlled by the devices were immediately detected. The designers were satisfied with it, and we were no less satisfied, as we were able to reduce the number of people assigned to guard the facilities. The equipment worked successfully until the fall of 1941, when it was dismantled during the evacuation of the coastal base of boatmen from Pier. The winter passed. The division was intensively preparing for the launching of boats and the beginning of the summer campaign. In early March, my family and I were alarmed by a night phone call from Kronstadt. The caller was V.F. Tributes, Chief of Staff of the fleet. I received an order to arrive in the morning in Kronstadt, having previously surrendered the division to K. Shilov, the commander of the 1st Detachment. All night I transferred matters to my successor, much surprised by what was happening, and at dawn I left for Kronstadt. At the fleet headquarters, I received V.F. Tributes and congratulated me on my appointment as Chief of Staff of the Brigade of Torpedo Boats. Immediately proceed to duty, so he finished his brief instructions. What explained the haste I never understood. Without wasting time, I started to work, which was plenty. I had to fulfill the duties not only my own, but also those of Kombrig G.P. Nestved, as he was at that time in the Frunz Naval School as chairman of the graduation committee. While the exams were going on, the brigade commander from Leningrad did not appear often. I began with the establishment of a clear organization of combat training. Together with the flagship specialists of his staff corrected the planned tables of bringing divisions and the brigade as a whole in full combat readiness. It turned out that the capacity of compressors is not enough for the timely preparation of torpedoes, and I decided that there is a way out. We need to keep torpedoes with full pressure in the tanks. Having given the order, I still decided to get authorization to store torpedoes with full air pressure and sent a request to the fleet headquarters. There was no reply. I sent a second one, the same result. Then sent another letter, in which I wrote that the lack of responses to the previous two I understand as an agreement to our proposal. And then the headquarters was silent. 2 weeks passed. Suddenly we came to us representatives of the fleet headquarters to check the organisation of the brigade in full combat readiness. The control exercise began at the command of the inspectors and went according to the schedule we had worked out. Everything went as it should, and I only noted in the planning table reports coming from the divisions. All met the established standards. But here at the command post came the brig, who went on a boat with V.F. tributes in my former division. He was obviously upset. "What have you done?" exclaimed G.P. Nestvid. "In combat torpedoes, pressure of 20 to 30 atmospheres above normal. Tributes calls to his headquarters." We went to the fleet headquarters. Tributes, having listened to my explanations, which were supported by the flagship fleet miner V.F. Black, only expressed his displeasure. F. Black only expressed displeasure with our unauthorized decision to store torpedoes with increased pressure. I had to report about the letters sent to the fleet headquarters, to which we never received a response. Now Tributes has already fallen on the staff. I did not have time to stay 3 months in his new position, as I was appointed commander of the brigade of torpedo boats instead of G.P. Nestvader. Soon I was promoted to the next military rank, captain of the 3rd rank. And now in the fall, at the fleet exercises, I was in charge of the actions of the divisions from my command post on the leader Leningrad. "Look, Boris Viktorovich, your men have gone into attack," the commander of the leader AP, Petrov, shows his hand. I can see how, obeying the commands from the aircraft driver, radio-controlled boats are rushing forward. On each of them 2 people in case of failure of telecontrol equipment. The boats strike the enemy compound and withdraw. I know about it from radio reports from the bridge of the leader, can observe the actions of only one division, and strikes on the enemy struck subdivisionally from 3 directions. So I thought, the command post of the brigade should be placed not on a surface ship, but on an airplane specially equipped to control the brigade at sea. The weather is rapidly deteriorating. Low cloud cover, dark thunderclouds, force the airplane drivers to take the boats out quickly on the direction to Papia and hurry to land on Köpen Lake. I was waiting for the report on the return of the divisions to the base. But here comes a radiogram. There is no one radio-controlled boat we have to look for. I switch to a destroyer, which begins the search. Searchlight hardly cuts through the thickening darkness. The sea is deserted. Only once it seemed to me that in the darkness against the background of the high shore flashed the silhouette of a boat. I had to return to Papia with nothing. The rest of the night we spent with the commissar and the mediator on the quay. Vasily Mikhailovich Golovichev completely lost heart. What if they have fallen to the Finns? Every now and then he repeated. I had to calm him down. The morning came. Thick fog over the sea did not allow to send an airplane to search. But the fog lifted and we heard a characteristic sound of engines. Our missing man was rushing to the base. The bosun G.I. Karpushkin told us that he lost his orientation, and when the airplane brought the boat to the shore, he thought that he got into foreign waters. The bosun saw a destroyer, but decided that it was a foreign ship, and, turning off the distinctive lights, hid under the shore, stopping the engines. At dawn, oriented, everything became clear, and the boat lay on a course to the base. In the first days of December 1938, a group of senior staff of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet left for Moscow. It included the commander of the submarine brigade A. Prosurgin, commandant of the Izhora Fortified Area S. I. Kabanov, commander of the submarine brigade A. P. Shurgin, commander of the Izhora Fortified Area S.I. Kabanov. I. Kabanov, the commander of the battleship Murat S.F. Belousov, and his commissar V.M. Kulikov, the commander of one of the destroyers N. Falin, and from the brigade of torpedo boats me. We, as well as representatives of other fleets, were invited to participate in the work of the main military council of the People's Commissariat of the Navy. With great interest I listened to the speeches at the meetings of the participants of the war in Spain, pilot N.A. Ostriakov and sailors N.G. Kuznetsov and a G. Golovko. Golovko, who then commanded the Caspian flotilla, complained about excessive academicism in the training of command personnel, the fact that the flotilla, for example, is only now beginning to work out its immediate task to ensure oil transportation in war conditions. Finishing his speech, he urged to direct the combat training to the solution of specific tasks inherent in this or that theatre. Everyone liked Golovko's speech very much. However, the next day on the tables of the conference room we saw fresh issues of Red Fleet with a screaming headline of the front against narrow-minded division. The editor of the paper, T., looked at the assembled and grinned contentedly. The article accused Golovko of a delatial approach to the training and education of command cadres, whose circle of interests was thereby arbitrarily limited. On the same day, Politburo member A. Zhdanov, who was then a member of the main military council of the Navy and led all the meetings, apologized to Arseny Grigorievich on behalf of the military council for the ridiculous accusations. Listening to Zhdanov, the editor blushed and paled. I was sitting nearby and looked at him. Hardly anyone would want to be in the place of a zealous newspaperman. The final meeting of the military council was held in the Andreevsky Hall of the Grand Kremlin Palace with the participation of members of the Politburo. This day was presided over by Key Voroshilov. Stalin walked behind the backs of those sitting in the presidium, smoking a pipe. I remember an interesting speech by N.G. Kuznetsov about the need for high combat readiness, the air defense of ships based on the experience of the war in Spain. Announcing the end of the work, Key Voroshilov invited everyone to a reception hosted by the Politburo and the government. Stalin added, "Let's drink a little." The reception was held the next day in the faceted chamber, stacked with beautifully set tables. We were already sitting in our seats when the members of the Politburo and the government entered. The dinner was held in a relaxed atmosphere. Everyone was in a good, elevated mood. After a while, Stalin and members of the Politburo left the room, and to the table where the Baltic people were sitting came Deputy Commissar of the Navy P. I, Smirnov Svetlovsky, and offered to follow him. After walking through several corridors, we suddenly found ourselves in a small hall. On chairs in front of the movie screen sat members of the Politburo. A. Janov was also playing at the piano. We were invited to sit down too. The lights went out, and on the screen appeared frames of the memorable movie If Tomorrow is War. The last scenes flashed, showing how the Red Army was beating the enemy on his land, how the enemy troops were fleeing under the blows of our tanks and airplanes. The lights were turned on. Stalin, apparently, wanted to get acquainted with the Baltic commanders, to talk in a relaxed atmosphere. But the conversation did not work. Our senior C. Kabanov worried that we will miss the train. Smirnov Svetlovsky said something to Stalin, and he angrily waved his hand, let them go. Already on the train we realized that we missed a rare opportunity to report on the needs of the fleet, their compounds. We realized it, but it was too late. After returning to the brigade, I gathered the division commanders and the staff, told them about the work of the main military council of the Navy. Then we separately discussed the issues of accelerated training of boat commanders from bosuns. The fact is that most of the commanders who had graduated from the naval school were taken away from us and assigned to the new destroyers, patrol boats and minesweepers. Even before my trip to Moscow, the brigade headquarters had prepared a submission for awarding the titles of commanders to petty officers bosuns I. L. Ustinov, N.F. Bayumov, A.V. Suvorov, V.D. Nalatov, A.O. Shibailin, K.V., Aristov G.I. Karpushkin, as well as petty officers motorists I. T. Sherbak, N.M. Moros, V.I. Maximov, P.M. Duka. In Moscow, I handed the submission to the head of the personnel department of our People's Commissariat, A.V. Zorin, and asked him to give it to me. V. Zorin, and asked him to speed up the awarding of ranks and appointment to the posts of boat commanders and mechanics of the units. And soon the order came to the brigade. All our submissions were fully satisfied. In the middle of March 1939, one afternoon, V.S. Cherokov, an old acquaintance of mine, also a gunboat crewman, came into my office at the brigade headquarters. We talked about the Naval Academy, where he studied, about acquaintances. Finally, I inquired about the purpose of his visit. Don't you know that I've been appointed Commander-in-Chief? I've come to take care of business. Viktor Sergeyevich was surprised. Called the fleet headquarters, everything was confirmed. Well, began the transfer of cases. Gathered commanders and commissars of divisions and air squadrons. I made a report on the tasks of the brigade in 1939. At the end, I introduced the new brigade commander. All were somewhat confused. The SS Cherokov took the floor and confirmed all my instructions for the upcoming campaign. I thanked the commanders and commissars for their service, wished them success and left for Leningrad. To report on the transfer of affairs to the fleet commander, I left Vive Sisters. Cherokov without me. The next morning I was already in Moscow. There I was appointed as an authorized representative of the Permanent Commission of Newly Built Ships in Leningrad. When I returned to Leningrad, I introduced myself to the chairman of the Permanent Commission of the Navy, Rear Admiral M. Dolinin. Mikhail Mikhailovich acquainted me with the organization of the upcoming work and the program of construction of boats, explained that as a commissioner I would have to head the Commission of Acceptance specialists and be personally responsible for the progress of the tests. The Admiral ordered to start acceptance of G5 boats and to prepare acceptance programs for new, still experimental torpedo boats SM-3, SM-4 and Komsomolets, as well as to continue the already started tests of hovercrafts. Everyone probably knows that there is such a profession, an aircraft test pilot. A test pilot. How many boys, having read the fascinating books of the hero of the Soviet Union, Mark Galai, dream of sitting at the wheel of the still undeveloped, the newest airplane? But there are also ship testers, surface and underwater, and their specialty is no less interesting. And tests of fast boats are very similar to airplanes. I know this from my own experience. The work of testing torpedo boats was already familiar to me in 1930 to 1932. While serving in the Marine Scientific and Technical Committee, I tested radio-controlled boats. Now I was to conduct acceptance of serial boats. Leningraders were finishing delivery of G5-type boats to the fleet, as well as experimental ones developed by design bureaus Komsomolets type and large ones with steel hulls SM-3 and SM-4 types. The permanent place of service was Leningrad, but from the first days it became clear that the main time would have to be spent far from the Gulf of Finland. The thing is that by the Soviet government decree for mass serial construction of combat boats of all types and various purposes were allocated factories in the south and east of the country. In accordance with the decisions of the XVI Congress of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, taking into account the strengthening of economic and military power of the country, the party and the government set the task of creating a sea and ocean fleet worthy of the great Soviet power. This decision formed the basis of the Navy construction program for the third five-year period. New line ships of the Soviet Union type, heavy cruisers of the Kronstadt type, light cruisers of the Chapayev type, destroyers of the Obnovoy type, patrol ships, minesweepers, submarine hunters, numerous combat boats of various purposes, a new series of submarines were laid down. It was planned to create more advanced aircraft, air defense and coastal defense. The program was designed for about 10 years. It is known that by launching the tonnage of ships of the Navy, our country was to take one of the first places in the world by 1942 to 1943. The program provided for the construction of a powerful surface fleet for the Baltic, Northern and Black Sea theatres, including battleships, superior to similar ships of Germany, Great Britain, the United States and Japan. But in the fall of 1940, in the conditions of the outbreak of World War II, the government decided not to lay down more battleships and heavy cruisers, and to focus on the construction of small and medium-sized warships, completion of large ships with a high degree of readiness. In 1939, the factories where the boats were to be built had yet to be thoroughly reconstructed or even put into operation. It happened so that by the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, literally on the eve of it, only one of these plants was able to start handing over to the fleet the first small group of torpedo boats. Acceptance of G5-type boats built by the Leningrad plant went strictly according to the plan. Experienced workers, craftsmen and engineers achieved high quality of their products, so needed by the fleet. The tested boat left the factory berth early in the morning or in the evening and went to the bay. It was white nights and the work was not interrupted for a day or even more. We meticulously tested the boat at all speed modes, checked maneuverability and seaworthiness. Again, as in the first years of naval service, I stood at the helm, and the obedient boat rushed forward, then stopped, then described a steep circulation. I liked the work. It was impossible not to feel a sense of satisfaction, passing to the fleet one, after another small but formidable ships. Along with acceptance of torpedo boats of usual design Redan and semi-glider type in the same months, I had an opportunity to test a remarkable boat of V.I. Levkov's design. Levkov. I first got acquainted with this talented inventor 2 years earlier, when I commanded a division of radio-controlled torpedo boats in Papia. One night, in the late summer of 1937, I was summoned to the phone by the operational duty officer of the fleet headquarters. The Chief of Staff has ordered you to leave immediately to meet the road train that is moving to Papia. It is accompanied by Pyotr Ivanovich Smirnov-Svetlovsky. I left immediately, taking with me several Red Fleet men. The car with a heavy platform on it with some shrouded body, like an airplane with the wings removed, was met at the bridge over the river near the village of Sistopolkino. The bridge turned out to be narrow for the trailer. We had to remove the railings. That's when P.I. Smirnov-Svetlovsky introduced me to Vladimir Israelievich Levkov. The next day, V.I. Levkov and the engineers who arrived with him told the story of the creation of his brainchild, a hovercraft. The idea of a wheelless rover on a cushion of air belongs to Konstantin Eduardovich Tsiolkovsky, began Levkov. In the 27th year, his book Air Resistance and Fast Train was published. We at the Novocherkassk Polytechnic Institute immediately became interested in the idea of transportation on a cushion of air and decided to try to realize it. Air blown by motors' fans under the bottom raises the hull of the boat above the water surface, and changing the path of the airflow allows maneuvering. That's all, smiled the chief designer. What we have got, see for yourself, see for yourself. In fact, everything was not so simple. For a decade from 27th to 37th year, Levkov and his staff have done a tremendous job. After all, they had to go off the beaten track, on an uncharted path. In 1927, a young associate professor Levkov, a specialist in aerodynamics, began experiments on models of hovercrafts. Only 7 years later, in 1934, the world's first hovercraft was put to the test. It was a 2-seater boat L1. After the boat was largely successful in the planned tests on Lake Pereyaslav by government decision, V.I. Levkov headed a special design bureau. In 1936, a new model hovercraft, L5, was tested. It had a duralumin hull of catamaran type and weighed 9 tons. During the tests, the boat developed a speed of 130 kilometers per hour. And more, the L5 moved not only over the water surface, but also over land. This boat arrived in our division for further tests in sea conditions. P.I. Smirnov-Svetlovsky, inspector of the RKKA Marine Forces, was appointed chairman of the L5 Commission, and I was appointed his deputy and test pilot. It was necessary to identify technical and tactical capabilities of a fundamentally new vessel to develop recommendations for its further use in the Navy. I devoted several days to a detailed study of the boat's device and mechanisms. Together with mechanics engineers, I thoroughly understood the control system of 2 powerful aviation star-shaped motors of M45 type with 850 horsepower each. The motors were placed in a diametrical plane in the fore and aft parts of the ship. Horizontally located propellers of these motors fans and created an air cushion under the bottom of the boat, blowing air there. How does it move forward turns? Asked on the first day of the senior lieutenant I. F. Kudin, appointed by me as the commander of the boat, and his motorist petty officer first article V.S. Kamaev. I told what I had already learned about the clever design developed by V.I. Levkov. The boat moved in the horizontal plane by changing the direction of the airflow under the bottom of the boat. For this purpose, in the immediate vicinity of the motor's fans, the designer placed rotary shutters jalazis. If the shutters are set vertically, the boat floats motionless above the surface of water, or land turn them around the boat, starts moving in a given direction. The first trips to the sea were successful. The boat, obedient to the rudder, moved forward and backward, hovered over the water, and turned almost on the spot when the air currents were working backwards. We developed speed up to 130 kilometers per hour, checked the seaworthiness in a 3-point wave. Everything is excellent. After the first outings, Smirnov-Svetlovsky returned to Moscow, entrusting me with the testing. Further work was carried out under my supervision. Tests on the range of navigation, or rather to say flight, we were disappointed. "Motors are warming up, Comrade Commander," reported Valentin Sergeyevich Kamayev. This shortcoming, as it turned out, was not new to VI. Levkov. It turns out that he has already done some work to try to eliminate the dangerous overheating of motors, but it was not possible to make the necessary design changes on the L5. The fall was over. November rains and stormy days were replaced by December frosts. Pancake ice appeared in the bay, and near the shore it was already firmly gripped by frost. All boats of the division were put in boathouses as the navigation was over, and our L5 continued the trials. Almost every morning we warmed up the engines, checked the operation of all mechanisms. Bishay-5 is ready for the trip, reported to me V.S. Kamayev. V.I. Levkov, our divisional specialists navigator T.I. Savankov, and sometimes minesweeper B.T. Kuznetsov boarded the boat. Short reports on readiness, and I.F. Kudin, commander of L5, leads the boat along the gentle shore to the bay. The boat passes over solid ice, over separate ice floes which every day more and more in the bay, and finally roaring engines rushing over the grey, cold water. Great. By the end of the year we completed all the tests stipulated by the program. When summarizing their results, we had to point out certain shortcomings of the L5. The main one was overheating of the engines. Besides, when the air rudders were shifted to a large angle when turning, the boat received a significant roll and tended to overturn. To eliminate this danger, and also to reduce the drift in strong side wind, VI. Levkov decided to introduce special rudders on his boats, similar to the lifting keels of centerboards. The tests were to be continued in the winter of 1938. The program provided for testing the boat's movement over ice and snow. Since the fall of 1937 in Kronstadt, Krasin was preparing for the important task. The veteran of the country's icebreaker fleet was to go to the Greenland Sea and make its way to the drifting station North Pole in order to capture the brave winterers E. Papanin, E.T. Krenkel, E.K. Fedorov and P. Shershov. The government appointed P.I. Smirnov-Svetlovsky as the head of the expedition. Pyotr Ivanovich decided to take a hovercraft on board the icebreaker. To Leningrad L9 a vessel with a wooden hull and 2 140-horsepower motors was delivered on a railroad platform. It was decided that the boat would come to the Krasin on its own, over the frozen Gulf of Finland. Unfortunately, the crossing route was not surveyed, and the departure was obviously hurried. As a result, Captain Lieutenant K.A. Shilov, who was driving L9, failed to control the boat and could not bypass the hummocks encountered on the way. The boat received significant damage to the hull, which could not be repaired before the icebreaker went to sea. The participation of the hovercraft in the polar expedition was abandoned, and it was a pity if skillfully used VI. Levkov's vessel would have surely successfully operated in the Greenland Sea, and it is not excluded that after that many organizational difficulties, which arose when finalizing the drives from motors to fans, could have been solved in a short period of time. Spring came. Without waiting for the bay to be cleared of ice, we continued testing L5. The motors were still overheating when working at full speed for a long time. In order not to melt the bearings, we had to stop the boat's movement. It was lowered to the water and turned into an ordinary catamaran. Of course, with such a serious defect, it was impossible to recommend the boat for service. Levkov was not discouraged and said that by the next campaign 1939 will solve all the problems. In the spring of 1939 tests were already 2 types of hovercrafts L11 and L13. Their hulls, like those of the L9, were made of aircraft plywood. They differed from the previous models by the number and location of motors. On L11 there were 3 aircraft star-shaped air-cooled engines, and on L13 the designer left 2, but placed them at an angle of 45° to the horizon in the hope that this will improve their cooling. I went to the tests every day then on L11, then on L13. The boats were moving over water, swamp, overcoming sandy rolls, natural and specially constructed obstacles. The cameraman allocated to our commission was proud of the spectacular footage. He filmed the boat's movement over the log jams floated on the river and the exit to the precipitous shore, and overcoming the deep ditches, equal in width to 2/3 of the hull length. The signallers at the fleet signal posts were no longer surprised by strange vessels rushing to the shore and coming ashore. And at first there were funny mishaps. One of the Red Fleet made a record in the signal and observation log. A torpedo boat crawled ashore and disappeared into the forest. Crocodiles, as the boaters nicknamed the hovercrafts, moved confidently over the ice of the bay and over the flat terrain on land. However, the engines on the L11 and L13 still overheated, just as they did on the L5. Back in 1937, under the assignment of V.I. Levkov, the design of the gearbox transmission from the motors to the propeller's fans was developed. In this version, the motors, as on airplanes, were placed in a horizontal plane, and thus received their proper cooling by the airstream. Unfortunately, the manufacture of the propeller engine group with gearbox transmission was delayed for a long time and was not finished by the beginning of the war. In the summer of 1941, the tests of the boats of V.I. Levkov were to be continued, but with the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, the trips to the sea were stopped. In August, in connection with the approach to the Koper Bay of the Hitlerites rushing to Leningrad, all the hovercrafts L5, L9, L11 and L13 were transferred from Pripyat to Kronstadt. In the first post-war years V.I. Levkov continued his work on designing hovercrafts, but engines with gear transmission from motors to fans were not created. Therefore, when the tests of the pre-war L5 were resumed, the motors were still warm at full throttle, and the tests were stopped. In 1954, Vladimir Israelevich Levkov, a remarkable scientist and engineer, thanks to whom the world's first hovercraft was created in our country, died. Works on ships with this principle of motion in our country were temporarily stopped. In the late 50s, early 60s, in the foreign press, there were reports of work on the creation of prototypes of hovercrafts. In 1959, the first English hovercraft designer, Cochrane hovercraft, crossed the English Channel. Cochrane was recognized as the creator of a new type of ship. At one time, reports on the works of V.I. Levkov, for obvious reasons, were not published. The first report that revealed the contribution of V.I. Levkov to the creation of a fundamentally new type of transport was in 1963, my article in the magazine Marine Collection. Soviet designers in the 60s, 70s created several types of hovercrafts. Among them are Neva, Rainbow, Gorkovchanin, Sormovich, and other types of vessels that are successfully used in the national economy. There are now hovercrafts and in the Soviet Navy. The dream of V.I. Levkov realized. But it could have happened much earlier. It is very important to support the new in time, even though it sometimes seems, at first glance, unnecessary and inapplicable in the near future.